Welcome to the 11th Indie Ref Weekly Review, bringing you a roundup of news you maybe missed every week into the Scottish independence referendum in September, which is 1 month today. This week, shipbuilding, Boris Johnson and the Grassroots movement. But first, a report published this week from the British Medical Journal claimed that 60% of doctors in Scotland will be voting no in September. This very quickly fell apart as it was revealed that the total number of people polled was only 311, making it about 689 people short of what most pollsters would consider to be an official poll. However, that did not stop Better Together doing a press release around it, nor did it stop the Metro and the Scotsman from reporting on it. Just remember, folks, that newspapers have no legal obligation to be unbiased in their reporting, and both these papers have been quite openly pro-union. What is interesting about the poll, though, is the reasons why those who responded have chosen to support both yes or no. The thing that doctors voting no were least concerned about was the possibility that people would get worse care in an independent Scotland, citing instead worries about the economy and funding for medical research as more important. On the other hand, doctors voting yes stated that they were doing so because they believed it was the best way for people in Scotland to get better health and social care. This story comes at a time when it is being reported that the privatisation of the NHS in England has been a failure, with instances of private firms receiving money for treatment that was never even provided, with Netcare alone making over £35 million for patients they never treated, plus examples of surgeries going wrong with the NHS having to provide the intensive care treatment afterwards while the private company walks away. But that's the model in England. Health is a devolved power, which protects us from Westminster's privatisation of the National Health Service. That's what the No Camp have been saying, and that is technically true. But we receive our funding from the UK government as a percentage of what England spends on its NHS. And as Labour Shadow Health Secretary in England, Andy Burnham, says, if things stay as they are, the competition framework being foisted on the NHS will in the end break it up. It won't survive 5 more years of this. So, if the English NHS goes, the funding goes. If the funding goes, Scotland's funding goes with it. We are hearing this now as another £20 billion worth of the NHS is being outsourced over the next few years. Remember that in England you already have to pay for prescriptions, eye checkups and dental checkups, while we don't. Back in June, a recording of a former member of the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities was released, stating that the UK has become the first country to face a high-level inquiry by a UN committee as a result of grave and systematic violations of the rights of disabled people. This week, we discovered that under Westminster, over 100,000 people in Scotland will lose their disability benefits. The UK government has failed our sick. What else could you expect from a party that includes Conservative MEP Daniel Hannan, who stated that the NHS was a 60-year-old mistake? Meanwhile, the SNP has called that the right to a publicly owned healthcare system be written into the Scottish Constitution after a yes vote and become a right to everyone living in Scotland. That's the country I'd rather be living in, not one that turns its back on those who need our help the most. Before moving on, I want to make a quick correction on something I'd said last week. I'd ran some numbers to do with how much influence elected Scottish MPs had at Parliament. I came back with a number of 3.6%. A few people pointed out to me that that number was wrong and ridiculously low, so I went away and checked, and they were correct. The actual percentage of the Houses of Parliament that is made up of democratically elected MPs from Scotland is 4.1%. So I guess that's my whole argument of there being a serious democratic deficit in Scotland blown out of the water. Or maybe not. And while we're on the topic of the House of Lords, this week David Cameron ennobled, which means made a lord, a man by the name of Michael Farmer, a city banker who just 2 months ago donated £300,000 to the Tory party. Isn't democracy in the UK just great? This week we see again that there will be no new powers after a no vote. Boris Johnson, the Mayor of London, stated that these powers were even more things we're giving Scotland. For no reason we are promising the Scots more tax powers. Quite why, I don't understand. There is no need to do it. Here we have a man that stated before that a pound spent in Croydon is worth more than a pound spent in Strathclyde. He followed up his rejection of more powers by asking, what has devolution ever done for England? And that's it, right there. The face of Westminster. If it doesn't benefit England, what's the point of it? This wouldn't be so worrying if recent opinion polls didn't currently show that Boris is the most likely candidate to be leading the Conservatives after David Cameron steps down. Don't be fooled by the floppy hair. This is a fundamentally dangerous man who currently has a very bleak vision for the future of Scotland. Or for that matter, anywhere outside of London. This week on Project Fear, the ongoing campaign to keep you scared of independence, we discover that only under Westminster will the shipbuilding industry survive. Except that on Friday, unfortunately, the Ferguson shipyard in Port Glasgow, the last shipyard on the Lower Clyde, went into receivership. So it turns out that the union can actually do hee-haw about shipbuilding other than throw over the odd military contract. Under Westminster, jobs in shipbuilding have dropped from 35,000 in the 1970s to less than 9,000 now. But if we control our money, we can invest in shipyards again and bring Scotland back to what it once was. And now onto the final section, it's the fact of the day. As we all know, food bank use since the coalition began has risen by 400%, a horrifying statistic given that we apparently live in one of the richest countries in the world. But what is more worrying is that this week Better Together Aberdeenshire stated that food banks were, in fact, a sign of Scotland becoming a modern European country, as other countries have food banks too. They then went on to say, and I quote, "Far from being a sign of failure, they are an enriching example of human compassion, faith and social cohesion." This made me have a look at the campaigns in total, and there are stark contrasts between the two. On the no side, we have examples of Better Together activists being bussed up from England because active support in Scotland is so poor. We have examples of activists being paid to distribute their literature. The campaign online has been no better. Every day, scare stories with no basis in reality. Even now, Better Together are still claiming that healthcare agreements across the UK would break apart in the event of a no vote, even though health bodies have come forward and said that this is just not the case. When asked what independence meant to him, Rob Shorthouse, Director of Communications for Better Together, said that the independence campaign pays my mortgage, that's all I want to say. And when the campaign isn't justifying food banks or trying to scare and fool us, it's just plain failing. Hands Across the Border, a move to try to get people to link hands across the border, failed to get enough interest. Instead, they're building a pile of rocks to symbolise how much Scotland means to England. The Union Border Rally failed because no one showed up. It's been a continuous story of failure to get anything moving or anything inspiring. Because the No campaign have no vision of the future of Scotland, nothing to get excited about, only apathy in those who have become disillusioned by politics in the UK. But then I look at the Yes campaign. I see thousands of groups across Scotland giving their time to a cause they passionately believe in, trudging doorstep to doorstep and having the conversations that we need. I see fire trucks with the spirit of independence splashed across the side of them. I see Women for Indy, Generation Yes, National Collective, English Scots for Yes, Labour for Indy, the SSP, the Greens, the SNP, the Commonweal, the Radical Independence Campaign, all coming together to create the largest grassroots movement in Scotland's history, driven, passionate, shouting from the rooftops that another Scotland is possible. Shops and street stalls across the country, referendum cafes, and moving arts Yes to Vote that brought music and art to communities across Scotland and showed them what an independent nation could look like. Music, art, the pure, the daring and the brilliant, the Fringe, the 3,000 Trees, and so many other plays and stories that look at who we are, what we can be, discussion, people becoming the media online, the rebirth of town hall politics, and all off the back of the people who work and breathe and live and die in Scotland, not the Tory bankers and millionaires in London who have been funding the Better Together campaign from the beginning. We've had messages of support from around the world. The world want us to join them as a country of our own. Since the coalition began, we've seen a 400% rise in food banks, 1 in 5 Scots slipping into poverty, shipyards closing. We've seen financial ruin from the deregulation of the banks on the Westminster. At some point we forgot what hope looked like. I've seen hope in politics for the first time in my life. I've seen something to really fight for, something that gives us the chance to say no thanks to this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and through this campaign Scotland has found her voice again. I want to hear this country speak for itself. Let's let the world hear us. And despite this passion, this energy to build a better country and a generation inspired to be involved in their communities again, to make a difference, we have Better Together campaigners say that they wish that this campaign wasn't happening, begrudgingly accepting that they have to fight to keep things as they are, no matter how crap they might be. And if you had to choose between this campaign of colour and life and possibility and a campaign that can barely muster enough support to move forward, who would you rather was leading the country? I believe that we can do better. On our horizon, and I can hear a growing sound. Oh, it's the voice of Scotland's people, saying freedom's coming round. Let's hear the voice of Scotland's people, saying freedom's coming round. That's everything from this week's Indie Ref Weekly Review. Music this week was provided by Citizen Smart. Links to his music and everything else below. If you have any questions on independence or a story you want to share, send it over to indirectcommunity@gmail.com. Follow me on Twitter at StephenPayton134, and please do share, like, and subscribe. I'll see you all next week, and remember, don't hate the media, become the media.